Hello and welcome to another episode of Agency Leadership Live. I'm your host, Chip Griffin, and today is a very special episode of Agency Leadership Live Friday Q&A. I have my Agency Leadership Podcast co-host, Gini Dietrich, joining me. So let's get into the show. Without further ado, we will bring Ginny on.
No sound again.
No sound? You can't hear me?
Oh, wait, there you are. Okay. Hi.
So the wonders
I have
of live technology. Oh,
I have a special guest.
I'm looking at YouTube, and it does not appear to be showing up on YouTube. So.
Oh, no.
Let me see.
Just for like 1 minute.
Anybody is actually seeing us on YouTube?
How about 20 seconds? 20 seconds.
Yay, 2020. Amazing.
Mommy, Baba.
Let's see. What does Restream show us?
Where's the green?
It shows that we're online on YouTube, but I am looking right now at YouTube.
When will they come?
I know.
What?
Hold on. It created a new live stream. Let's see if I can switch streams in midstream. I'm betting I can't. Let's see. We're about to find out if this actually goes to YouTube. Yes, there we go. We are now live on YouTube. So you've missed the fancy opening on YouTube. You've missed you are now live. You can now see us, and that is the important thing. So
Woohoo! Yay!
2020, what can I say? So
Woo! 2020 is right. And today has been a 2020 day for sure.
it certainly has been. Now, are you going to start with a little show and tell for us?
Oh, yeah, I have some show and tell. Yes.
The important things before we, dive in.
I have, as promised. This is, the name changes every day, but I think we're on Chubby Cheeks today. Chubby Cheeks. She's kind of nice. You're still called that. We just do it behind your back.
Actually, when I was a kid, my nickname was Gerber. So.
Was it really?
Yeah. That was my high school nickname. So.
That is a compliment. Gerber babies are cute.
Sure, we'll go with that. But my volume is super low. Excellent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
So, well, you could have told me that earlier.
Oh, well, I didn't know you could do anything about it.
Oh, it's not. Wait a minute. It doesn't even look like it's coming out of the right device. Hello.
Oh, 2020. This is amazing.
My volume is super low, and I'm not able to. Why can I not boost it?
We also have a dog tail back here if you want to see the dog. I have lots of animals. I could go get the fish while you're working on that. I mean, I can entertain with animals.
I can see my mixer doesn't seem to be happy, so let me reset the mixer.
La 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 la. Yeah, I can't hear you. Nope. This is how it typically goes with
How about
us.
this?
Normally,
is this better?
Oh yeah, much better, and
okay.
I can hear you too. Wow. Okay, I'm gonna turn the volume down.
One day I am actually going to get one of these shows to actually work without having all sorts of technical issues. But the last few weeks have been miserable from that perspective.
Live.
Yes, the joys of live. So. In any case, thank you, Roxanne, for letting me know that I was quiet. Ginny, next time you can't hear me, just let me know so that maybe I solve this before we go live.
I can hear you. I just had you turned all the way up.
Yeah. Usually people mute me. So in any case, all right. Well, let's go ahead. If people have questions, feel free to share them in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you have comments or snipes or anything like that, you can share that as well. But we obviously have questions from the mailbag, as we always do. So we will start with those and then integrate your comments and questions as we go along. So
I feel like I'm with David Letterman. Questions from the mailbag. Isn't he the one who did that?
I don't know. A lot of people have done questions from the mailbag. It's not really that original, but it's the nice thing. If you have questions, of course, you can always submit them by going to well, actually, no, you can't go there or there. Oh, good. Now my graphics are all broken today too. Just go to agencyleadership.com and you can use the Ask Chip functionality. And, if it's feeling really friendly, it will actually let you submit a question that way. But we won't be answering those on this week's show. That's for next week's show because I don't look at the mailbag while I'm actually doing the live show. I've got enough problems as it is. So, all right, first question from the mailbag. Let's get in. Let's get some substance for people before everybody tunes out. So the first question is, what are the advantages and disadvantages of term versus open-end contracts? And this is a question I actually got from a coaching client this week because they were sort of debating this. They do typically annual contracts.
Right.
or 3-month contracts, depending upon the nature of the work. But a lot of their annual contracts just renew consistently, same scope, same price for, several years at a time.
Ever. Yep.
And so, I said, well, have you considered doing open-ended agreements instead, where it's just, it kind of continues with a 30-day out or a 60 or a 90-day out, whatever it is, but just kind of keeps, it's an evergreen contract, is the sort of the inside speak term for it. So what's your take on that? What's the best approach? What are the pros and cons?
Actually, we hired a new law firm 5 or 6 years ago, and they're one of the very first things they did was put us on an open contract so that it was, we'll change scope of work. I hate 2020. I hate this. I hate it. Just
it's fine. Just keep going.
So we have a 90-day out termination clause in there. And it's interesting because for the most part, everybody signs that. We've had some people come back and say 30 days and we negotiate to 60. But from that perspective, that really helps just from a cash flow planning perspective, which is good. And it doesn't require us to go through the legal piece of it every single time there's a scope change or a new year comes about or whatever it happens to be. We can just keep it going, and then we can, we don't have to get the lawyers involved in all that, and we can just keep working with the day-to-day client to just continue working. So I'm a big fan of the open-ended. But I would also say that also gives clients a little bit of flexibility, especially in a year like this year where they can say, can we just put this on pause? And the answer, of course, is yes. So it's given us the flexibility to bring clients back on after they've paused and just continue to have that contract in place.
Yeah, exactly. I love the master services agreement and statement of work combo. I think that works in any case, even if your statements of work have a time limit on it, having that underlying master services agreement that is evergreen. Solves that problem. But I'm a big fan of the statements of work, generally speaking, being open-ended as well. I've used both over the course of the last 20 plus years of running businesses, but I've now come consistently to using the open-ended agreement unless there's a real specific reason for limiting it. Now, that said, the one advantage you do have if you do have renewal processes is it does give you an opportunity to adjust the scope or the price more easily.
Or the price.
Right, because if you've got an evergreen contract, it's harder to do that, not from a legal perspective, but just from a business relations perspective. Particularly changing the price, right? So, but if you're not going to do that, and most agencies with term agreements don't do that anyway, or if they do, it's a 3% escalator or something like that, which is frankly effectively meaningless. So if you're not going to use the leverage that you have by doing a term agreement, then all you're doing is taking on unnecessary risk. So I'm a big fan of the open-ended contract.
I will tell you too that this year we've tried something a little bit different where we have everybody signs the master agreement and then we do a statement of work that's really specific and time bound and has specific deliverables and a price. And then when that's over, we do the new contract or new statement of work. And when that's over, so that has allowed us to both say, all of the things that we thought that we were going to do have changed, and here's why. And the statement of work has to change because of that.
Right.
And the price has to change. And it's easier to have those conversations because of it. Also, clients feel a little less bound because of that, because, everybody, I think, right now wants the flexibility of being able to say, this is a rough year and we don't know if this is going to continue. So they like the flexibility of being able to, while they have the contract there, it's more project bound from a statement of work perspective.
But the dirty little secret is clients have that flexibility anyway, because with the exception of you, I don't know anybody who has actually sued their client in order to get compliance with an agreement that they wanted to get out of. So,
listen, I sometimes will spend money just to prove a point.
And that's what we all love about you, Gini. That is, it makes you unique. Yeah.
Unique, yeah.
Yeah, and I think most
I've
agencies.
matured, but yeah.
I think most agencies have figured out this year that that contracts are not really worth the paper they're printed on, because plenty of clients have bailed out, even if they've got what is on paper a binding agreement. And what are you going to do? You're just going to sit there and pound the table and say, "No, you can't leave. You must pay me."
Right.
Okay, great. Good luck to you. But
good luck is right.
Anyway, all right. Before we get on to the next question, I will relay Doug Haslam's very, very smart, smart ass comment that Ginny is louder. Shocker. So, I guess that's a little bit of a shot at you, Ginny. I don't know how you feel about Doe doing that.
I thought we were friends, but listen, I'm not going to donate to your bride anymore.
Ooh, them's fighting words from one cyclist to another. All right. So let's see. Let's see if I can read my own handwriting. See, I do these on paper so that I can just have a nice little sheet of paper instead of having to go back and forth to the monitor. Plus, I condense them when I do it. But then, of course, I can't read my own handwriting, and my eyesight kind of sucks. So I need to, get it to a place where I can focus. Anyway, my team isn't filling out reports in a timely fashion. How do I fix that? And this was someone who was asking specifically related to media trackers and things like that. So what hits are in process, where do they stand, that kind of stuff, and So, how do you get compliance from your team, Ginny?
I mean, you and I actually had this discussion on our leadership podcast episode recording yesterday, which has not gone live yet, but. That's a tough one, because you're not going to get clients generally if it's something that's hard, more work, or it takes a lot of time. I mean, the example we use in the podcast episode is time tracking.
Right.
Getting compliance on time tracking is nearly impossible. You have to do it so that you know how much time things take and how much things cost, but that one's a really hard one. From a media tracking standpoint, there's plenty of software that you can use that just inserts a code in your emails when you're sending to reporters, and it automatically creates the reports for you. So if you have a process, and that's one of the things we discussed on the episode as well, if there's a process that you use, you can find the software to support that. So, from that perspective, I don't necessarily know that you have to have compliant filling in spreadsheets on media hits, because there is software that will do that for you.
Well, this was more related to where it is in the process. So has it been published? That kind of stuff. So you wouldn't necessarily get that just out of email. But I think I think fundamentally the thing is you have to figure out, why isn't there compliance? Is it because your current process is too difficult? Is it because they don't believe in the process? Is it are they just overwhelmed, right? I mean, what is it? And then the second thing is, you also have to think about, roles. So, particularly as an agency grows, you may have more junior people who do reporting for a number of folks, particularly for things like this, where, so perhaps the folks who are out actually doing the media pitching are not the same people who are actually filling out the spreadsheets or entering into software. It depends upon your setup, but really,
I need someone to do that for me.
Yeah. But the key is to get to the root cause and try to figure out why it's not happening at first. So anyway, all right. Well, that will. I think that's enough on that one. We'll move to the next question. But we have another Doug Haslam comment.
Oh, good.
And this time it's a shot at me. He says he'd rather hear you, Ginny. So.
That's because he wants me to donate to his ride.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's no dummy, I mean,
He's definitely not a dummy.
Doug's been around the block a few times, probably a
He
few more
has.
times than both of us. So,
I think you just called him old.
did I?
I think you did.
That was not my intent. I would never ever want to do that. Ever.
I'm sorry, Doe.
Roxanne also chimes in and says to make sure that you provide a process that keeps friction low for reporting.
Yes.
And I absolutely agree with that. And Doug is now
100%. I mean, keep it simple.
simple is better. Simple is better. And if you subscribe to the Agency Leadership Podcast, you will actually hear a more detailed discussion about some of those things in the context of choosing tools. But that's the episode we recorded yesterday, but should be available next week, assuming I get my act together and do production. But I haven't finished production of this week's episode yet. So hopefully I'll get to that this afternoon in between rebuilding my network and, fighting off blacklists for my home IP and that kind of stuff.
Address. Yeah.
So let's see how
It's been a day.
we're getting some engagement here. Shell Holt says that it is a worthy cause. I assume he's talking about Doug's ride. Doug chimed in with a $sign. So, short and to the point. And then he took another shot at me. He says that he looks younger than I do. So he doesn't care if he's older.
Well, it's good to know that, we can't keep anything on the rails. The podcast we can't keep on the rails. We can't keep this on the rails. So, we're at least consistent.
But that's why people tune in. I mean, why would you tune into a boring live stream? And I can guarantee you that, the technology may not work. I may have really ugly titles that just are not working correctly. Oh, that one worked correctly. How about that? So we had one title that worked correctly, but most of the stuff is just falling apart today, kind of like me. Anyway, all right. Let's see. I'm always producing more media hits than my team. How do I get them to do more?
Sorry.
It's a condensed version. But, really the question is, I think if you broaden it is, why doesn't my team do as well as I do as the agency owner?
Oh, that's the agency owner asking?
Yes.
Oh, well, nobody's going to do as well as you do. No one.
Ding, ding, ding. Yep. But honestly, that is something that's, I think, difficult for most agency owners and other entrepreneurs to grasp is that nobody will ever work as long, as hard, or as well as you do. There's a reason you started the business. There's a reason you're willing to put those hours in. Your employees, by and large, don't have those same incentives, desires, and all that kind of stuff. And there's a lot of space between someone who's just collecting a paycheck, right, and someone who is an owner. Huge middle ground in the middle. You don't want the person who's just collecting a paycheck. That's not going to work out. But in that middle swath, you will have people who perform better than others and put more effort in, but it will never, ever, ever match up with you.
Never. And I think that's one of the challenges with hiring business development people, especially for the type of businesses that we run. They're just not they can do it, but they're not going to do as well. And so one of the things we always do is we do door openers instead of business development. And then I'm always the closer. I'm not necessarily making it rain, but I'm definitely closing. And I think that it's because we've had that very hard lesson that just nobody does it as well as I do. Because you're right, they're not incentivized the same way. It's not their blood, sweat, and tears. It's not the baby that they've birthed. It's just not the same.
I would agree with you on that. The only thing I would say is that even in cases where they won't do it as well as you do, it doesn't mean that you should always do it, right? Because a lot of times as owners, we think it needs to be done to a certain standard. And it would be great if it was done to that standard. But the reality is that most of the time, if you get 80 or 85% of that standard, you're still going to be accomplishing what the client wants. You're still going to be closing sales and all that kind of stuff. So you have to be careful, because this is one of those risky things where if you believe that no one can do it as well as you do, if you then try to do it all, first of all, they're never going to improve, right? And that goes to the other part of this question is, if they're not performing up to your level, that's one thing. If they're not performing up to the level they need to in order to service the client, then you need to figure out, what support do they need? What training do they need? And instead of saying you need to do more, you need to do better, again, root causes, figure out why they're not performing and try to break down those barriers, because ultimately, and I've got an article coming out on this soon as I finish editing it, that talks about the importance of being accountable to your team rather than just demanding accountability from them, because your job as a leader, as a manager, and this goes for whether you're, a mid-level manager or the owner of the company, you need to figure out how to break down those barriers for your team and how to get them what they need to perform. It's not just to take out the whip and keep saying more, right? I mean, that doesn't work.
Yeah. I mean, the best leaders are those that roll up their sleeves and get the work done with you, alongside you. Those are the best. So yeah, I totally agree with you.
Cool. It's great when you agree with me, Ginny. So, and
it's
even
not often.
And even better that at this break point between this and the next question, I don't have any more snippy comments about either one of us. So, I don't know whether that's because everybody has tuned us out now or because they've gotten in their shots and they don't need to do anymore. So, or maybe since Doug is old, he went to take a nap. Okay. Let's see. Is it okay? This is another contract question. Contract questions were popular this week. Is it okay to have a client respond to an email to renew a contract, or do they actually need to sign something? And I will caveat this with, we are not lawyers. All of the legal advice that we offered earlier and that we will offer now is not really legal advice, because that would be a crime in some states. We're not giving you legal advice. We're giving you business advice. Yes.
Hold, please. I have to provide tech support.
Sure. I will go ahead and mute you, and I will start answering the question, and then try to remember to unmute you. So, or maybe, actually, that's even better. I'll just keep her muted because that's way more fun. Anyway, so if you are sending an email to get a contract renewal, in general, that's probably okay for a number of reasons. First of all, as we talked about earlier, contracts don't mean a whole lot. So really, you're just trying to get the client to commit to it. In an ideal world, yes, you would have someone sign something, and I would prefer to see you do that. But if for whatever reason, it's because, maybe it's a quick thing that you just need done and you need some documentation of the authorization, it's probably going to be okay. You really should talk to your own lawyer about what they're comfortable with. But again, if you're not going to enforce the contract anyway, just getting them to sort of, be on the record is probably sufficient. But now I will unmute Ginny and let her have her crack at it.
Yeah, I agree. And I will tell you that my attorney prefers, they'll certainly say, yeah, it's fine to go ahead and issue an invoice and start work if you get the email, but they want, not only do they want the signature, but they want the whole contract. So I've submitted before where it's just the signature page.
Right.
Nope.
Yep.
They want the whole thing.
Well, but this is where tools can help you. So, tools like Docusign are great for this kind of thing because, I switched to Docusign a number of years ago for all of my businesses. It works great. My experience is that more clients spend less time arguing with you over terms when you use Docusign because it's so easy for them just to go in and start checking things off and saying, yep, sign, done. And so you don't want to put things over on them. But we've all been through the experience with clients, if we've been in business for any amount of time, where someone's like, well, in Section 7, I didn't really like the indemnity clause. And, and so you want to try to avoid those kinds of debates if you can. And so I like DocuSign. It's similar to an email as far as the ease with which the client can process it, but it has more legal weight, than that email. Although my lawyer will tell me, a verbal agreement can be a binding contract. It's just harder to prove. So, however you get there is fine, in my opinion. But again, not legal advice. Talk to your lawyer.
Not a lawyer, right?
Yeah. The last thing I need is like a bar association complaint against me, since I've never even been to law school. So, but that would, just be the icing on the cake in 2020.
It would be at this point, right?
Yeah. Shell Holtz is saying that he's multitasking because he has to make a living. So, I guess that's why he's been a little more quiet. So, I don't understand. This is making a living. If you're listening to us, this is professional development. Although Shell is Shell's in-house now, so I guess it's probably a harder case to make for him to his bosses that this is professional development. But I think it's professional development for anybody.
I'd also like to know from Shell how the fires are affecting him, because it's pretty bad out there.
Yeah, everybody I've been talking to in California lately is it's been crazy. So
my dad's right outside of Portland, and it's really bad there too.
Wow. And my brother's in Seattle. I haven't heard anything up there. I'm not sure it's gotten up that far. But
anyway,
let's see.
I hope you're okay, Shell.
And Roxanne says, "Get your waders on, people." So I think that's another shot at us. I don't know. Lovely.
I like Roxanne.
Roxanne's good people. So let's see. Oh, and Kevin Dugan says we're here for the small native. So
well, she's right here, Kevin.
Yeah, but we didn't check the box that this is for children, because it's not. If you're a child, you really shouldn't be watching this show. We don't have anything truly inappropriate, but it's not a lot of fun. So Shell has an update. He says his car is covered in ash every morning. They're staying inside. They have the worst air quality in the world currently, but we're safe, he says. So
terrible. Yeah. Terrible. I'm so sorry.
Yep. Not a good thing. I saw Jonathan Bernstein, who's got Bernstein Crisis Management with his son Eric. Great guy. He's I've known him for a lot of years. He lives in Southern California, and so he showed a video out his apartment window looking at the fires that are near him, and you can see just to the naked eye, trees burning not that far from him. But apparently he says they're okay because it's the fire's burning in the opposite direction and the authorities expect it to continue to. But geez, I would not want to be looking out my window and being able to see
I wouldn't either.
Mountains with trees on fire. So
it's terrible.
Yeah, not good. But those are things that we cannot help with. So we'll move on to questions that we might actually not do any more harm with, at least. How do you decide what to say no to? Hopefully people are not saying no to us here, but this goes back. This was a follow-up question I got because I recently, I think I had an episode where I talked about the importance of saying no, and that a lot of agencies get in trouble because they say yes to everything. I had a guest on the Chats with Chip podcast. It'll be airing in a couple of weeks. He said to me, anything for money is sort of the mindset of most agency owners when they get started, but it's not just saying yes to potential clients. There's all sorts of things that you should say no to, but how do you decide what to say no to? I mean, how do you draw that line? And obviously this would be a topic for a long conversation, but in a nutshell, how would you suggest that agency leaders think about what to say no to?
I am the absolute wrong person to ask that question of, because I am terrible at it. Terrible. I would rather work 24/7 than tell someone no, which is not good. It's a massive character flaw. And yet,
I'm going to have to keep this in mind. I'm going to keep a list now of things that I would like you to do and see if I can get you to say yes to all of them. I'm going to put this to a test, Ginny.
Oh, good.
So you're not.
Yeah, I mean, it's really challenging. I really am the worst person to ask. Like, I know logically and intuitively all the things. Like, we're not going to say yes to a client that doesn't make sense. We don't have the expertise. That's easy. But where I get into the weeds
hold on. Let's stop there for a second, though, because I don't think it is that easy. I think a lot of agencies say yes even when they don't have the expertise.
That one's easy.
Yeah.
Like, I had somebody say to me the other day, we have a client that's doing a consumer brand launch and they need national fashion PR, media relations. Can you help? And I was like, oh.
Right.
But no. We are not the right firm for that. That's not what we do. You would pay us a lot of money to figure it out. No. And I can refer that on. So that stuff is easy for me to say no to, because we know what our target verticals are. We know what we're really good at. And consumer fashion media relations is not it.
Right. Yeah, and I think that you touched on something important there, which is that you need to say no to things that you're not good at, that you don't have expertise in. You need to say no to things that are not profitable. Right. And that's a tough one for folks, because you see added dollars and you assume profit. A lot of times it's not profitable. Right. Particularly if you don't have the expertise, because then you've got to try to figure out how to get there, or you ruin the relationship because you've said, yes, we do that. Yes, we do that. And how many agencies have you run across over the years where you say, do you do websites? Do you do social media? Do you do press relations? Do you do events? And they say, yeah, yep, sure. No problem. We can do that. And that's a huge mistake. Those are big things to say no to. But you also need to say no to things that just don't feel right. And this is in that sort of murky gray area, but you have to trust your gut. And that's whether you've got a client who's asking you to engage in some activity that you're just not comfortable with. Maybe you can't even put your finger on exactly why, but you feel like it's not the right thing. And I know you've had an experience with that where it wasn't too muddy for you, but you've had an experience recently where you said, no way, no how. That's not the way our agency values things. And then there's sort of the next layer below saying absolutely no, but instead I like to say, well, we can't do that, but we could do this. So if it's near where you want to be, either in scope or in type of work or offer that. Well, here's how we could do that instead, right? That's particularly for those, if you see something that's in that, my gut just doesn't feel right with this. Offer an alternative instead. And that can be a good way to maintain the relationship. Because a lot of the reason why people say yes is because they don't want to lose the relationship, particularly with existing clients.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. If it's an existing client and they're asking you to do something, that's a little more challenging. And certainly it leads to over-servicing and all that fun stuff that we all tend to do.
Right.
But I will also
Doug
say,
specifically cited scope creep in his comment, saying that's a real challenge.
It is a real challenge for sure, and especially because you don't want to tell a client no if it is close to what you can or should do, right? But I will say that I have a client that I'm actually building a peso model program for them that's focused on content at the center, and we're interviewing PR firms to do national and some international media relations, and the CEO said, "I feel like PR firms are just charities. You give them money, they say they're going to do all this stuff, and then you never get any results." And I was kind of like, I hear that a lot. And I think that's why, because we tend to, as communicators, and I can speak to that industry specifically, we tend to be people pleasers, and we don't like to say no. And media relations is media relations from our perspective. And it's not. You can't, I would never, ever, ever take on a national consumer fashion client because we don't have those contacts. We don't know how that industry works. None of those things. But I think a lot of people would not say no to that because it's media relations.
Right.
And it's not the same. It's not the same industry by industry.
Well, and also you have to think about, the expectations that you're setting with a client, because I think that's
right.
part of the challenge, and that's going to your charity comment. A lot of times that happens because agencies don't want to have the uncomfortable conversation, particularly
Correct.
in the business development phase, where they set reasonable expectations. And so they don't necessarily, and I'll have someone say, well, I never told them I could get them in the Wall Street Journal. But did you dissuade them when they sort of mused about it and you just kind of, you moved on to the next topic? So you allowed them to assume it. And instead, you should step in and say, well, hold on, here's how this really works, and particularly for things like media relations where you're dependent upon third parties. So this is not, building a website or doing content marketing or doing advertising where a lot more is in control of the agency.
Yep.
When it comes to media relations or influencer marketing, you're in a position where you have to convince somebody else to do something. And that's always a longer play. It's going to take more time to get it done, and particularly in media relations, usually it takes more time for it to yield results. You don't get that story in the Wall Street Journal even and then have an overnight success, right? I mean, it still takes time to build. And Kevin Dugan has a good comment here that I want to read. Saying no also gets into agency positioning. It's less an exercise of what you want to do and more an exercise of choosing what you do not do. And I couldn't agree with that more. I think that you really need to be clear first with yourself about what you don't do. What kinds of clients don't you work with? What services do you not provide? what geographies do you not work with because of time zones or those kinds of things. You need to be clear about those with yourself. But then I'm also an advocate that you should look at your website and your other materials and make sure that it speaks to those ideal clients that you want to get, but just as much that it scares off the people who are not good fits. And I know this is really scary. And every agency owner I say this to says, oh, my God, I don't want to scare people off. I want to at least have the conversation and see if it's a good. No, you don't.
No,
you don't. You really don't. You want to talk to people who are likely good fits. And that means that, I mean, you may even want to be as explicit as to say on your site, these are the types of clients we don't work with. These are services we don't provide. It can be literally that explicit. It doesn't always have to be. But if you don't know what you will say no to from that perspective, then you can't create an environment in which more qualified leads are coming your way. Don't waste your time talking to people who are not good fits. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I will add to that just as it's a little bit of a side comment, but I remember sitting at Blog World in probably 2009, and I was having a conversation with Marcus Sheridan, and he said to me, why don't you have pricing on your website? And I did the typical agency owner thing. I was like, well, it depends on what the client needs and what they're asking for and what their goals are. I mean, and he said, do you have minimums? And I said, yes. And he said, put them on your website. And I fought him. I was like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. I don't want to scare anybody away. And he said exactly what you said. Why not? And I was like, well, then how do I do my business development? But he got in my head, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and thought about it. And so we finally did that. We added pricing to our website, and we showed our minimums, and we showed, what is included in those minimums typically. And we went from about 80% of my time going to meetings and coffees and lunches and dinners and happy hours of networking and meeting people who were kicking the tires to about 20%. And I remember at the time freaking out because I had all this space of no new business meetings. But I wasn't really doing new business meetings because they never hired us.
Right.
And now I went, and when I finally came to that realization, and the realization was the 20% of the meetings, the time that I was spending on new business meetings, were actually leading to something, I got comfortable with it. But yeah, it's super scary. And that is your first reaction is, why would I not want people to call me?
Right. Well, the secret is, if you're clear about who you won't work with, it actually helps you with the people that you're trying to reach. So in the pricing example, showing your minimum pricing can actually start to attract people who say, "Whoa, that's an attainable number for me." Because otherwise, someone may look at you and say, Ginny's got a book and she's on 85 podcasts and she's got this really, a popular website. She's got to be charging, at least $100,000 a year, or $250,000 a year, or whatever. And so you may start to attract some people that are right in your sweet spot that thought you were too expensive. So for as many people as you will scare off who don't have that budget, you will probably attract some who thought that you were even more expensive than you are. And it goes the same for saying the kinds of services you don't provide to the people you don't work with. I mean, I look at my current business in working with agencies, and the more clear I've been about my positioning is working with small agencies, that attracts the small agency because a lot of people I talked to, thought that I worked mostly with the big guys, right? And if you're clear about who you work with and who you don't work with, they can say, "Oh, geez, I was talking to someone who mostly works with large ad agencies. You're actually the kind of person that I want to work with." Great, right? So by saying no to certain segments, I've actually improved my positioning with the folks that I can get the best results for. And most agencies are in the same place. Yeah,
really, really great point. Really good point.
So say no to get to yes, or something like. Maybe there's a book in that. Probably someone's already created a book called "Say No to Get to Yes" or something. I mean, just about every book idea has been taken these days. So you just rewrite it, put your own name on it, and it all works from there. But in any case, well, I think that's going to bring us to an end of this week's live Q&A. I do appreciate everybody tuning in and listening to the fun banter that we've had. Thank you for those people, even those of you who took shots at us in the comments. It's always good to have some engagement so that we know that we can be heard. And thank you, Roxanne, for letting me know that I couldn't be heard really at all at the start of this show. But I'm glad that you can now hear me. As always, if you are interested in watching a replay of this or any other episode, just go to agencyleadership.tv. If you want to ask a question for next week's show or you just have other topic ideas, visit agencyleadership.com and use the Ask Chip functionality. Ginny, where can people find you if they'd like to learn more about you or work with you?
Spinsucks.com.
Pretty simple.
Very easy.
You know, it doesn't get much simpler than that.
It does not, actually.
So, and Doug says that he's glad to have finally dropped in on one of these. Doug, I am glad that you finally dropped in. I expect you to show up more. When I'm not having technical difficulties, I'm here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at noon Eastern time. And sometimes I show up even when I am having technical difficulties. So with that, we will draw this to a close. We thank you for joining. We hope you'll listen to the Agency Leadership podcast as well as these shows. Visit SpinSucks, visit agencyleadership.com, and have a great weekend. I'll see you next week.
Bye.